Hi, I'm Kayla Wilkins with the Canadian Bryomonitoring Project. We've put together this video so that we can give you a demonstration of how to sample your moss. So our sampling steps, there's three main ones. So first, you're going to reserve your turf. And what this means is you're going to go to the website, www.bryomonitoring.ca, and you're going to select which grid square you're going to sample. Presumably you've done that already. Then we'll move on to step 2, which is spot your moss. So this just means recognizing the two species that we're looking for, and you can sample either one of them. So Hylocomium splendens, or the stair-step moss, or Pleurozium shrubberi, the red stem moss. And we have some information on the website about how to identify those. Step 3 is to pick and package your moss. And so that's the step I'm going to talk about today, is the picking and the packaging. So our first step that we need to do to pick and package is to find our moss. So we want to be in a non-urban area. We want to find our moss at least 300 meters from any major highway, at least 100 meters from nearby roads and houses. And if you've taken a trail to get to your sampling area, try to get with at least 50 meters off the trail. So you found your moss species, and here I found some Pleurozium, and I've met all of those conditions that I'm in a non-urban area. You can maybe tell by the bug jacket, and away from roads and houses. So I'm just about ready to sample. The other piece that we need to consider is that we want to be sampling in a 50 meter by 50 meter area, so approximately. So if I look around me, I don't quite have that here. So I'd want a little bit bigger space if I was actually sampling for the project. Also, anywhere that I sample, I want to make sure that I'm at least 3 meters away from the edge of a tree canopy. So where the branches end on a tree, I want to be at least 3 meters from that. And the reason is that we want to find out what is in the air. So we're looking for different components in the atmosphere. And if we're under a tree, we might get some runoff from the tree that will impact what we find in our samples. So we want a nice open space. Within that 50 meter by 50 meter area that you're going to sample, you also want to look around and be able to find a few different good patches of moss. So that area doesn't need to be uniformly covered with moss, but you want to be able to sample from a few different locations within your patch. So I found my patch here. I have some nice Pleurozium right here that I'm going to sample. I have a few other patches around me that I can go to pick from. Ideally, I would want a bit bigger area, and I need to be a little bit further from the tree canopy. But this will do for our example today. So what you should have with you, and you would have either made your own sampling kit or received one in the mail from us. You're going to want your field sheet. We've given you 2 brown paper bags, or you would have got your own, a pair of gloves, and a pencil, and I like a Sharpie as well. You don't want to use pen, because if you write on your field sheet and it starts to rain, the pen will run. So we're safer with pencil. Before we even start picking moss, we have a couple things to do. So I haven't put my gloves on yet. I'm at my spot. I'm gonna go to the center of my 50 meter by 50 meter area, and I'm gonna fill out my field sheet there. And the reason I go to the center is because I need to write down the coordinates of my location. So once I found my sampling space here, before I start picking, I'm going to fill out my field sheet. So you just put your name, your date, the time, your grid ID, your coordinates, and your elevation. And we have some information on the website of how to find those pieces of information. You can check off which moss species that you're going to pick. You could pick both of them, but we wouldn't want them in the same bag. So just choose one species to fill your bag. And there's some more information here that you can fill out about what your sampling area looks like. So once that's done, we are going to set that aside until we're ready to package. And we're going to take one of our brown paper bags. And on this bag, I'm going to write my grid ID, my coordinates, and the date. And optionally, you can also put your name. And I'm going to put mine there. So you can fill that in at the top of your bag. You want to do that before you start because it's really hard to write it on once your bag is full of moss. And also when it's raining. So pencil or Sharpie for that. Here's another tip that I like to do when I'm sampling. I know I'm going to want to pick a third of this bag full of moss. So I take my bag and I fold it in thirds so that when I open it up again, you could even draw those lines on. So just open the bag, and now I can see where I have to fill to. So I've divided my bag into thirds. I want to fill a third of this bag with my sample. So set my bag aside. Probably would have got my gloves on before I opened the bag, but I'm going to put them on now. So we always want to wear gloves if we have to handle the moss. Okay, so I've done all the prep work. Now I actually get to the picking part. So I have a few species actually in this clump of moss, but I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for Pleurozium. And so I'm just going to pull out a little bit. So you want to pull out the whole stem, and then you want to pick out anything that's not your moss. So sometimes there'll be pine needles, dirt, leaves from other plants. Pick that out. So you're just left with the frond. So that's the cleaning stage. Then you rip off any of this brown stuff here at the bottom. So we just want the green bits at the top. So I just rip that off with my gloves and I put that into my bag. And then I get another little piece. You can grab one frond at a time while you get going, or you can grab a few. Just make sure the whole piece is coming up. I've got a little bit of debris here that I'm going to pick out. And again, it's just with your fingers, you just rip off the brown, dried out bits at the end. You can get rid of those and put them in the bag. You want to check as you're sampling that you have picked the right species. So I pulled up a couple pieces here. Oops, the one I just dropped is the sample that I want. The other one is a different species of moss, and so I don't want that one, so I'm going to carefully put that back. So just check as you go that you have the right species. And you're going to keep filling. It's going to take, it can take about 20 minutes to fill a third of the bag, depending on how sparse or how much moss you have. As you go, once you've picked a little bit from this patch, move over to a different patch within your 50 by 50 grid square. So just move around the square. You want to pick from at least 5 spots within your 50 by 50 area. So we're going to pretend that I did that. And this bag here I've already pre-picked. So I have it about a third of the way full with moss. A little bit over would be okay. We don't want much more than that because we've given you a return envelope, and so it's shipping the moss back is based on weight. So even though you might be really keen and want to fill a bag, it'll probably get lost in the postal system. So we want a third of a bag full of moss. Once you have filled your bag, third of the way full, you're just going to fold over the top, and that's all you have to do to store it. And then you're done at the site. So we filled out our ID sheet. We're going to check that. We've put our coordinates, grid, square, and date on the bag, picked our moss, and folded it over. We will now probably need to dry our moss. So if it's rained at all, if it's damp at all, it's pretty dry here today, but I might still leave it overnight for some extra drying. When I get back home, I'm gonna find a dark area, low foot traffic, just room temperature is fine, and I'm gonna open my bag again. And I'm just gonna set it and I'm gonna let it dry overnight or a few days or however long it takes for my moss to dry out, because we want to ship the dry moss back. If it's raining while you've been sampling, or if your moss is really wet, this brown paper bag is not going to hold up very well, and that's why we've given you a second one. So once your moss is dry, or if your bag has disintegrated because it got wet, you're going to move it with your gloves on into a new bag, or just carefully pour it so that you're not touching your moss at all. When you have your moss ready to go in the bag, and we'll use this one again that we've labeled. So I've got my third of a bag of moss. I dried it out. Oh, if you do have to transfer from one bag to the other, remember to write the grid square and the coordinates on the new bag as well. So I've got my labeled moss bag, and it's dry. You're actually going to squish it down. You're going to take your field sheet that you've filled out. You're going to fold that up. And you're going to take your moss sample and your field sheet, and you're going to slip it into the envelope, the return envelope that we've sent you. And so the return envelope will have the address where it's going. It's got the postage there. So you just package this up into your return envelope. It should be a yellow envelope, and send it back to us. We don't need anything else in the bag, in the envelope. You don't need those gloves back or anything like that. So that's it. That's how you sample, pick, and package your moss for sending back. And we would greatly appreciate all of your samples that we're going to get back. And thank you very much for participating in the Canadian Bryomonitoring project.